Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to be here this morning. I really appreciate Lonnie filling in for me last week. Very unexpected, of course, with our earthquake, and just appreciate him filling in for me. On that note, guys, as far as the DOT is concerned, the roadways in Allegheny County were not very much damaged, but there are a lot of folks in Allegheny County that's houses were damaged. And just like if you would, just please remember those people and lift them up in your prayers this morning. It's no one that I'm aware of had earthquake insurance. Your regular homeowners doesn't cover it, and so these folks are some of them can't go back into their house, and then the ones that's houses are just foundations cracked and it's still livable. It's the concern of, well, trying to fix it, and then if it's fixable, and maybe you can continue to live in it, but the value of it when you go to sell it. So just a lot of things going on. So just remember those people that were affected in Allegheny. Obviously something that you don't consider very often when you think about an earthquake in the mountains of North Carolina. So just lift them up. But anyway, I do appreciate Lonnie again, and glad that I'm able to be here this morning. I appreciate him jumping ahead a lesson. I don't know where he went. But I appreciate him jumping ahead a lesson for me so I could do the lesson that I prepared for last week. Thought it was a really, really neat lesson, and I just was excited about bringing it to you. So we're going to be looking at the lesson entitled "We Support One Another." It would be the lesson that was for the dates last week. So it's the lesson for August the 9th. And it's on page, or I'm not sure on page on y'all's book, but it's the lesson for August the 9th is the lesson that we're going to be going over this morning. Again, the title of this lesson is "We Support One Another." And the point of the lesson is that God gives the church spiritual gifts to accomplish His work. And we're going to be looking at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 7, and then verses 11 through 16. But we're going to look at this idea of supporting one another and the idea of God giving the church spiritual gifts to accomplish His work. And, the first question in my Sunday school material this morning is that when has being part of a group helped you accomplish something big? So the question is, when has being a part of a group helped you to accomplish something big? And, does anybody want to share? April said Bible school, and that was what I was going to talk about for sure. But as we're sitting there, as anybody's watching us online, just think about when that being a part of a group helped you accomplish something big. And obviously, as April said, Bible school is what comes to my mind. I love Bible School Week. I love Bible school. I love it because of what the impact we can have on lives, but I also love it because of the opportunity it gives our church to come together and to work at something for a week, and seeing everybody doing all the different parts and things that it takes to put it on and to get to be a part of it, to me is just amazing, and it's truly accomplishes something big. So I think there's no better example in my mind than Bible school. But the English poet John Donne wrote that no man is an island. And he was saying that in reference to all of us have interaction with others. We require interaction with others. We cherish interaction from others. This COVID pandemic that we're in has opened our eyes to that even more than ever. April and Lonnie, bless you, you've been quarantined, twice? And the McVeighs, y'all have had to deal with a quarantine, and being isolated like that, really hard, isn't it? Bobby mentioned that in the deacons meeting, just having to stay at home the whole time gets old. And April and Lonnie, I know, this isolation and not being around others, it's hard, and it's been different, and it's been difficult. And we were talking this morning in our deacons meeting about the desire that we have, and how we truly look forward to opening our church doors again, where we can come together and be with each other and hug each other and shake hands and talk to each other, not 6 feet apart, but actually talk to each other. And, we miss it. And that's one of the difficult things when we start talking about opening the church back up and coming back to church, is that, that's so hard to do, even though we know we're supposed to be 6 feet apart. Once we're together, we don't want to be 6 feet apart. We want to be close. And so this lesson, as I've said ever since this quarter started, these lessons were almost written for the COVID pandemic, and it's got to be God, because it was written way before anything happened. But we do have a desire to be with people and to be with each other, and this idea that no man is an island. Then we're going to look at it further. No believer, no Christian is equipped to do it all by himself. Do we realize that? No Christian is equipped to do it all by himself. We can't stand alone and perform God's work. That wasn't how Christ started the church. That wasn't what the church was started for, was for Christians to go on their own and do things. We were meant to be together and do things together. And that comes to the point of our lesson this morning, that God has equipped us all with goals and talents to help accomplish His work. And these talents that we have and these gifts that we have mend together with everybody else's to accomplish God's work. I got to thinking, I was trying to think of an example, and the best example I could think of is a vehicle, right? Okay, so I can take one spark plug out of a truck, and it'll still run, won't it? It'll run. It's going to I've got a truck in my yard, the half-ton Ford truck, and it just runs on 7 cylinders. And you can drive it down the road at 35. That's all you got, 35, right? And it sounds like a jet. It just rumbles and carries on, and I just ain't going to pay $1,000 to fix it, because it never leaves the farm. But so it'll run, but it don't run great. But you take a vehicle and you take the spark plug out, but then you put it back in and it runs great. It takes all the parts of the vehicle to make the vehicle work good, right? If your brake pads get bad, that isn't good, and the vehicle won't stop. If you take the throttle off of it and take the gas pedal out, the vehicle ain't going to go. But all of those parts in the vehicle are essential to make it. Now, I'm going to take that back. Them dang roll-up windows and all them doodads, I don't know what in the world, them ain't essential. But the essential parts of the vehicle, I'm just picking. Every part's essential, okay? I'm going to take that back, because that's just going really against my lesson this morning. But all the parts of the vehicle to make it operate the way that you want it to, they're essential. And if one part isn't there, then the vehicle doesn't work. Therein lies my point. And so, as we think about this idea of all the parts being essential, we're going to get into our lesson in our verses this morning. So, let's look at Ephesians chapter 4, and we're going to start with verses 1 through 7. Verse 1 says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that ye walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with longsuffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all, and through all, and in you all. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. And so we're going to look here in verse 1. It says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that ye walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. Paul starts out this section, and he says, I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord. Paul's a prisoner when he's writing this letter, right? He's in prison. And he says, I, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. Paul was a prisoner. What are you? What am I? That's what Paul's saying. He's saying, I'm in prison right now, but I am walking. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. I'm walking worthy of the vocation that I'm called to be. Paul says, look, I'm a prisoner and my vocation is a prisoner. But yet, I'm going to walk worthy and use my vocation as a prisoner as a way to serve the Lord. Guys, every one of us, some of us are working, some of us are students, some of us are retired, some of us, we have all just the spectrum right here that's sitting with me this morning. But it doesn't matter what it is or who we are, we can use that vocation and use that time of life we're in and use that talent that we have to serve God. Paul, as I read, the first thing that just hit me as I started studying this lesson is the idea of Paul as a prisoner. And yet Paul says, even in prison, I'm using what I have and my abilities and my talents to serve the Lord. And he's doing that to show all of us what? That we ain't got no excuse. If Paul can do what he did and what he's doing from prison, then we don't have an excuse why we can't perform our talents, use the position that we're in life at that moment, and do it in a way that serves God and that performs the duty of that essential part. Paul says in verse 1 again, he says, I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. I underline the word worthy. Paul says, I'm a prisoner, but yet I walk worthy. It doesn't matter what it is that we do it in a way that we walk worthy. And it, so many times we think, well, when I get to this point in my life, we think when everything lines up, when I get this job, when this happens, when that happens, then I'll be able to walk worthy. Paul says, take where you're at right now. I beseech you to walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. Whatever talent you have, wherever you have in life, right then walk worthy. We don't wait for the opportunity to walk worthy. Verse 2 says, he goes on to explain that point. It says, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love. He says, where we're at in our life, do it with lowliness and meekness and long suffering and forbearing, and we're doing it out of love. Now this goes back to the idea of the church, and how the church comes back to me as Jason, and how I can't perform everything on my own. It takes everybody. It takes, with anybody, it takes all of us coming together to make the church, as we've been talking about the past several weeks. And yet, each person has that vital role. Going back to the word that's become popular here in the past several months, that essential duty. We each have our own essential duty that no matter how small it may seem, or how big it may seem, it takes all of them to come together, and therefore we should perform that duty in lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another with love. Any discussion on verses 1 through 2? Well, then Paul goes on to say in verse 3, he says, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And what I did is I took little highlights and I underlined unity of the Spirit, and I wrote the word team. And I actually wrote team across my whole page right here. Do we see that that's what Paul is saying? To come together to perform our vocation and to do it worthily. I don't even know if that's the word. Do it in a worthy manner. How's that? To do it in a worthy manner, we perform that duty and that vocation with lowliness and meekness and long suffering, and we do it out of love. When we come together, we're endeavoring, what we're essentially doing is endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. We're endeavoring to be a part of the team. And there is no I in team, are there? How many of us have heard that? All of us as coached or whatever. There ain't no I in team. And they ain't no I in team. And when you look at that idea of this, as our goal, as our responsibility, as our duty, is to perform what it is that we can perform, to give, to use where we're at right now, to try to walk with worth there, and to serve God in that regard. And when we're doing that, then we're endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit, to keep the team functioning properly. And then Paul goes on to describe that even more in verse 4. And Paul is saying, for there is one body and one Spirit, even as you are called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. So Paul is just emphasizing this point. We all serve the one God. We're all on the same team. We're all striving together. And when we perform our duties, and when we use what we can offer, that we're doing it to glorify the one God who is above all and through all and in you all. Do we often think about things that way? We don't, do we? I don't. I think, well, this is my responsibility, and I've got to go do it, and it's just my responsibility, and I've got to do it, and, I'm going to go do the best I can. But do I ever stop and think that what it is that I'm doing, no matter whether it's at my job, whether it's at my home as a dad and husband, no matter whether it's here teaching, that everything I'm doing is, I'm truly doing it as part of the team to serve the one God and Father that's over all. Do I really grasp that point? And so many times I don't. I just get stuck in this idea that I've got to do it. Well, this is my responsibility, but I don't look at it as being my vocation and trying to walk worthy doing it all the time, because it's so much more than just me, that there is no I in team. Then the last verse there said in verse 7, it says, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. You know how we got on this team? We got on this team. It ain't like in high school, in middle school or elementary school, where you had two captains and they picked, and they picked you, and I was always the last one picked. And that just hurt so bad, right? You didn't want to be the last one picked. But that's how we make teams. And then you got into sports and coaching up here, and I'll never forget the drafts that we would have for soccer and baseball, and you would be the one, you'd go and you'd watch them try out, and you'd pick your team. Well, this team that we're a part of, we were picked. Christ Jesus picked the team when he laid his life on that cross. And his grace was enough. It says there, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. It don't matter how much sin I have. It don't matter how much I did wrong. Christ's grace is enough. The folks that Lonnie and I talked to after Bible school. And that's the point. His grace is enough. And his grace was enough to make you and me part of the team. We got picked. And I wasn't picked last. But we got picked through the grace of Christ. And that's how we became a part of the team. And Paul uses that to end this little account to show us how very important we are. That we were so important, and that our duties and our jobs and our vocations and our talents are so important that Christ gave his life to make us part of that. And that's how Paul ended. Is there any discussion before we go on? All right, our next group of verses, we're skipping ahead just a few verses. And we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. And verse 11 says, and he gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And so we see in verse 11, it says, and he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. And Paul is saying, he's outlining the gifts that were given and the talents that we have. But the point that I made, and I wrote right here in bold letters on top of that verse, is that the church leadership can't do it alone. You know, Paul's emphasizing this idea, and we're going to get into the rest of verse 12 and 13. But what I want you to think about as I read verses 12 and 13 is the fact that the church leadership, that Lonnie can't do it by himself. That Franklin Graham can't do it by himself. That no teacher, no preacher, no prophet, they can't do it by ourselves. And the reason is, if we look in verse 12, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. Because what a pastor, what a teacher, what an apostle, what a prophet can do is they help perfect us. They help bring us closer to Christ. They help grow us to where our bodies are more like Christ. Our actions are more like Christ. That we become more Christ-centered. But you know what? They can't do it on their own. They got to have our willingness and our help in everybody fulfilling the roles that we are given to make this all happen. And then verse 13, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, until we all come into unity. That means we all have to be willing. You know, there again, this word unity, the word team, we have to be willing to do what it is that we're called to do to make all of us come together in the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, to mold us more and more into Christ's image. And so that's when we look at the responsibility of the apostles, when you look at the prophets, you look at evangelists, you look at pastors, you look at teachers, you know, our job, Ronnie's job, is to help mold us more and more into Christ's image. But we have to take all of us to come into the unity of the faith. All of us have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to perform what jobs and vocations it is that we have. And as we do that, we are molded more and more into Christ's image. And I wrote underneath that, who and what is molding our images right now? What are we allowing to mold our image? You know, our image is molded daily. Are we allowing our image to be molded more and more Christ-like? Or are we allowing our image to be molded by other things? You know, our image is molded by what we see and what we read. Our image is molded by the people we associate with. Our image is molded by all different things. But what Paul is saying, and the point that I want to try to bring out of this, is that we need to make sure that our image is molded by Christ, and that we're trying every day to do things and allow our image to be molded more and more into Christ's image. Any discussion on verses 11 through 13?
Jason, I was thinking about, I don't know if this pertains really to your lesson, but for me, I was sitting here, thinking about all of this together, talking about walking worthily of the calling, and then these callings or these vocations that he's talking about, being apostles and prophets and evangelists. And how you were talking about each of us has vocations or gifts that we were given, and they all work together for the body of Christ. But I think sometimes, at least I do this, even though we have different vocations, we were all given the fruits of the Spirit. And and sometimes I think I have a tendency, or maybe we do, to say, well, she's the loving person, or she's the patient person, or he's the guy who's filled with joy, or this one is kind. But all of us were given the fruits of the Spirit. That's totally different from these vocational gifts that we have. And so I don't know why I was thinking about that, but just that, not to say, well, sometimes we count ourselves out of working in the body of Christ in an area, not because we don't have the vocational skills that are needed in that area, but because we haven't allowed the fruits of the Spirit to develop in our life to a way that we can use them. We've all been given those.
I think that's a great point. To Felicia's point, we even sing a song about it sometimes. It's called Excuses, right? I know myself, I'm good at making excuses of why I can't. And to Felicia's point, and I think what Paul is saying, and I think his introduction to this whole group of verses, that Paul's saying, I'm a prisoner. What are you? These excuses that we make. I mean, I put myself in Paul's shoes, and I've been out and preaching and teaching and starting churches, and now I'm in jail, and I think I've done enough. What else can I do? I've done all I can do, and now I'm in jail for it, and I've done my part, now it's somebody else's turn. How many of us have said that? Jason said that. I've done my part, now it's somebody else's turn. And Paul could have easily done that, but he didn't. And to Felicia's point, I think so many times we do make excuses of why we can't. I guess a great challenge for this morning is to start making excuses of why we can't. And then have to argue against why we can do something instead of why we can't.
Well, and I was thinking about, Jason, the idea of walking worthily. That's what made me think about the fruits of the Spirit, because I might have a gift of teaching, but if I do that vocation and I don't do it with love, and I don't do it with joy, and I don't do it with kindness, and I don't do it with patience, then the fact that I have the gift, I'm still not walking worthily. Just because I'm teaching, if I'm not doing it with the mind of Christ, the unity of the Spirit, then I'm not using my gift appropriately.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point too. Very great point. Anybody else?
What struck me was that, being a prisoner, it's kind of like what some of us are experiencing, except, of course, we've got it great. But I think being isolated as he was, the Lord really had a chance to talk to him about how great it is to be with people, because here he's talking about my vocation is being a prisoner. Y'all get to be with each other, so be good to each other. Work together. Use the Spirit. Use the gifts of the Spirit. Be faithful to the calling that God's given you, because you have it so great.
What a great point, April. What a wonderful point. Now, I hope everybody could hear April and Felicia with those comments online, but I guess to summarize, April's point is that Paul was a prisoner. He knew what it was like to be in isolation from others, and he's encouraging us all to use the gifts that we have to enjoy and to benefit God's kingdom by being together and to take advantage of that. And Felicia's point was that, we may have a vocation and perform a vocation, but in order to do it with worth, I'm tongue-tied, but to do it with worth, that we use the gifts of the Spirit. We do it out of love and patience and kindness, and in that way we fulfill that. And so I think those were the main points that they made. Anybody else before we go on?
Jason,
Yes, sir.
is that basically what you're doing right now?
We're attempting to.
We're isolated. We're in quarantine, but yet you're still providing a service to the general public that wants to take advantage of it.
What a great point, Danny. And Danny, that's what Danny said is that's essentially what we're doing right now. That although we're in isolation and under guidelines and things, that we're as a church trying to provide a service for those that can't be here, and essentially we are. And I'm thankful we're given that opportunity, and I'm thankful for Brian and Macy usually, and Lonnie's filling in this morning, doing the things that makes that happen as a church, and I do appreciate that very much. Appreciate our church being willing to support us in doing all the things that we have done since the pandemic has happened. Thank you, Dan. For our last group of verses this morning, it really ties all this together. It's Ephesians chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. And verse 14 says, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of man, and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love, may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together, and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. And so Paul is saying in verses 14 and 15, Paul is saying that is through teachers and the prophets and the apostles and teachers and pastors and evangelists that we learn about Christ. Therefore, or that we henceforth be no more children. That as we learn, that we become more and more knowledgeable. And he uses this definition of children and say that we're not tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. He's saying that we're no longer deceived, that we are aware of what it's like to live as Christians, that we're aware of what it's like to live as Christ-like. Now, there's probably some of you in here right now because this is what came to Jason Joyce's mind. Because, Jesus uses a different example of children, right? Jesus says that we're to have faith like a child. Now, Paul is saying that we henceforth be no more children. And so, I don't know why my mind works this way, but as soon as I read verse 14 in preparation for my lesson, my mind thought a contradiction. I said, now, why is it that Paul is saying be no more like children, and Jesus says that we should have the faith of a child? And let me try to explain what in my mind is the difference here. Because they're one and the same. Jesus says that we are to have faith as a child. That we are to have the faith of a child. Paul is essentially saying the same thing. Because a child's faith, he has faith in what? What he's taught. What he's around. The circumstances that he's in. And Jesus says when he makes the statement that we are to have the faith of a child as we believe in Jesus Christ, what Paul is saying that because a child has faith in all these things that are around him, it's so important that we teach them what Christ is really like and who Christ is. Does that make sense? If I made sense with that? Okay, nobody say anything. I'm kind of worried. But do you see that they're essentially saying the same thing? That Jesus says that we're to have the faith of the child. Paul is saying that the importance of being taught and the importance of pastors and teachers and prophets is that the faith of the child, we have faith with that we're no more like children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind. Because children do have faith in what they're taught. Jesus says a child's faith is pure and true. But if a child is taught wrong things, then they're going to do what? They're going to do wrong things, right? If a child is taught wrong things, they're going to do wrong things because of the faith of a child. What Paul is saying is that be no more like children because we are taught and learn how to do and learn about Christ and learn what it is to be a Christian. And therefore we're no more tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of man and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. And he's putting verse 14 on as a responsibility of those that teach and preach and evangelize and prophesy and are the apostles. He's laying that as a responsibility that we teach in a way that as we grow in Christ, we're no more tossed to and fro, that we're no more carried about with every wind of doctrine, that we're no more, by the cunning or directed by the cunning and craftiness of man. We grow more, and it's the desire and the effort and the responsibility of those that are teaching and preaching that we help folks grow more and more Christ-like. And then verse 15 it says, but speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. So by speaking the truth in love, the responsibility of those teaching and preaching and evangelizing is to speak the truth in love so that we may grow into him in all things, which is head, even Christ. So we can grow into Christ's image, the head, even Christ. But now we get into verse 16, and it kind of puts this all together. Verse 16 says, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth. From whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted. Paul ties this all back in from going back to verses 1. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called, to there is endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in verse 3, in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your one calling. So he ties all this together by saying that by us using our vocations, by us using our talents, using our gifts, then by us listening and being taught by folks that are Christ-like, to help mold ourselves to be more and more like Christ, by speaking the truth in love, may grow into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. By molding ourselves to be more and more like Christ, by being willing to use our vocation, by being willing to use our talents and our gifts. Then in verse 16, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplies. So we're fitly joined together and compacted and molded to which every joint supplies. Every joint. It don't say most joints. It don't say some joints. It says every joint supplies. And then he says, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part. According to the effectual working in the measure of every part. I started talking about a vehicle. And every little part, if I take the spark plug out of a lawnmower and put it in my truck, is it going to work? No. Because the spark plug for my truck is measured to fit in my truck so that it'll be effectual working. You see what Paul's saying there? That each one of us are perfectly made. We are perfectly in the place we're supposed to be right now, that we are measured to be effectual working. That's what Paul is saying. Do you see that? Danny gets it as an engineer, I know. Our tolerances are teeny on some things. Things are measured to do and work exactly what they were supposed to be. And that's what Paul is saying each of us are. That we are measured to be exactly what we're supposed to be, so that we can effectual working in the measure of every part. And then he goes to say after that, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. Make it increase. When going back to the vehicle example, when the vehicle is running right, when it's the most effective, when every part is working, that's making increase of the body. That's doing its potential and making it grow. When every part is working, it can go faster and faster and faster, and then it can stop when it needs to stop. And it can go when it needs to go. And it can turn when you turn the steering wheel. It can do everything it's created to do. And he's saying we all have a part in that. And that it maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. Making an increase that we can edify ourselves, the church, edify the church in love. Any more discussion before we close this morning?
Jason, we often don't appreciate how well things are working together, like the vehicle running, or our bodies working like they're supposed to, or the church running like it's supposed to, until one part breaks down.
Ain't that a great point, April? Ain't that a wonderful point? And guys, before we close this morning, on that note, we all perform essential duty. It may be prayer, it may be encouragement, it may be, you name it, anything. Teaching, preaching, it may be a worker, it may be a boss, it may be a father, it may be an uncle, it may be an aunt, it may be a grandmother, it may be a grandfather. We all are performing essential duties. And we are all given, as Felicia said, we're given the gifts to be able to do it. It's just whether we're willing to walk worthy in doing that and to realize how important we are. And I can't stress that enough. You know, there was a great Focus on the Family put out a little, and I've just drawn a blank. Guys, help me. What was the Focus on the Family cartoon thing? Adventures in Odyssey. And one of my favorite ones, and it was talking about a church, and it was a, a mythical kind of thing. Not a mythical, that ain't right. It was a made-up thing. But it was talking about, the one guy, he went and got people and brought them to church. And one guy, so he was the driver. And one guy went, and once they found people, they got them in the vehicle. And one person, once they got them in the vehicle and brought them to church, one person called them. And the guy that was doing the driving didn't think he was important. He wanted to be the one that did the teaching. So he quit driving and just started teaching. But then there was nobody to drive and bring the people in. So he stood there teaching, and nobody was there. And it is a great little illustration, right? It's a great little illustration to exactly what Paul is saying, how important each one of our jobs are. There's nothing that we do that isn't important. There's no place that we are in our lives right now that isn't important. And so when we talk about the living it out this week, the first point, it says reflect. It says consider the contrast between some of the cultural expectations of the church with the biblical expectations studied in this session. Confess and turn from any misconceptions about life in the church. Ask God to unite your heart with His regarding His church. The second point is to discover. If you're not sure what your spiritual gift is or how you can be of service in the church, ask other believers to help you. Many times people see our strengths before we do. Discuss with a church leader your desire to serve. And then the last point is to serve. If you've identified your spiritual gifts, look for opportunities to exercise them in your life and in your church. Invest your time, passions, and strengths in building up others in the church. And then I'm adding a fourth one. And my fourth living it out is to realize how important you are and how important what you do is. And that's the last point I have for living it out. Realize how important you are and how important what you do is. Guys, thank y'all very much. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. Appreciate everybody that's here. Appreciate everybody that's watching with us. It's just such a blessing to have folks tuning in and to have folks here scattering along. I want to throw out one more thing. I don't know how many Sundays straight in a row this is, but we've got to be hitting a record of Sunday mornings we're able to come and do this. Again, just so very, very thankful for that fact and that opportunity. Thank y'all, and have a great day.
5 minutes